Hey everybody out there in internet land listening to this. My name is Jesse Lynn, and I'm coming to you live from my bed. Probably the only podcast done from someone's bed, lying on their mat. In my little studio here in Santa Cruz, California. Crazy little hippie surf town where I was born and raised and never left. Just couldn't get out of here, no matter how hard I tried. Anyway, this is the first episode of the Jesse Lay podcast, and just a little bit about myself so you know who you're listening to and why you should give a fuck. My name's Jesse Lay, like I said. I'm 45 years old, and I have a rare, non-progressive form of muscular dystrophy. More on what that means later. I'm also the only podcaster in existence that breathes 24/7 with a ventilator. So that's why you might hear some breathing noises in the background, and my voice sounds a little bit different than most. But I think you'll get used to it. I'm pretty easy to understand, I think, all things considered, especially since I got all of my teeth pulled out about 5 years ago, and that hasn't really affected my speech that much. Surprisingly, I was kind of worried it would, so all you people thinking about getting your teeth pulled, I would highly recommend it. Don't have to worry about gingivitis or brushing ever again. That's right. And it's actually been a real nice thing for me, because trying to brush your teeth effectively when you can't open your mouth very far and you have to have somebody else do it for you, not very effective, as you might expect. So, yeah, I was born in Santa Cruz here way back in 1975, and Santa Cruz was a pretty small, sleepy town filled with hippies, and UCSC had just opened its doors right around then, or maybe even a few years later. It might have been like early 80s, and the town definitely got a lot bigger once that happened. And it's kind of gone from having a lot of small, locally owned stores to the typical chain store types places. We used to have a Borders, you know, there's, I can't remember the name of that fucking place. Well, all the hipsters know, you know the place I'm talking about. We've got one of those downtown, and really wiped out, I would say, 70% of the local businesses around here was the earthquake, the Roman Planet earthquake of 1989. It really affected the town in a heavy way, and the local businesses really never recovered. There's a really famous structure that used to be on Pacific and Cooper Street called the Cooper House. And it was this really awesome old Victorian building that was like converted into having a lot of small shops in it. And there was a jazz band that would play out front. This guy, Don Metaslin, and Warmth would play there once a week or more. He was like a vibes player. And then his son, Donnie Metaslin, ended up becoming a really big saxophone player. He actually played on David Bowie's last album, Black Star, which was one of his best albums. Anyway, just a little history about Santa Cruz. It's been an interesting town to grow up in. It was a pretty cool place to be a kid in. I went to the elementary school that is still just 2 blocks away from my house. Used to drive there in my electric wheelchair every day. And then I grew up here, went to Harvard High, graduated 1993. Then went straight to UCSC and got a degree in film. which I haven't really done a whole lot with, although I have written a couple screenplays, one long form and one short film, which I still hope to produce one of these days, if I get around to it. Maybe doing a podcast will help me do that. You never know. So I was born to Stephen Houtz and Nancy Crowley, two hippies transplanted from Los Angeles, and they fell in love not too long before I was born. And my mom was a social worker for Child Protective Services for most of her life. She was also a counselor and did a couple other things before she retired. My dad did a whole bunch of different stuff, mostly related to gardening and landscaping. He was the manager of a locally owned nursery that was right down the street from my house called Ebert's Nursery. They went out of business in the mid-80s, but they were pretty big back in the day in Santa Cruz. And then my dad was a private landscaper for a while, and he also worked for the county of Santa Cruz as a maintenance manager at Highlands Park, which is a park up in Ben Lomond here in the Santa Cruz Mountains. He did that for quite a while before he moved out of town about 18 years ago, something like that. So, yeah, my parents were very leftist, very, pacifist, hippie types, and very cool parents to have. My dad was a surfer and smoked pot and very leftist in his political leanings and influenced a lot of the way I looked at politics and also pop culture and books and music and movies. My dad was really interested in a lot of that stuff, and I credit him with a lot of my early taste and the things that he turned me on to. One of the coolest memories I have actually is my dad, when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old, my dad read a lot of science fiction and fantasy and horror, and Stephen King especially. And Stephen King had only written 3 books, I think, at that point. I think he was on Shining, not the Shining, obviously, his 3rd book. And I remember my dad was reading it, and I said to my dad, "Hey, Dad, show me something in the book. Show me the scariest part that will, be really cool." And here I am, 7 years old, and I'm just learning to read, right? And my dad proceeds to open the book to the chapter entitled Room 237. Was it 237 in the book? I always forget, because in the movie I think it's 237, but in the book it's 217 or something. I don't know. I know there's a difference. But anyway, yeah. So I started reading this chapter about Jack, who goes into this room, and you know how it goes. The fucking dead lady in the bathtub. At first she's this totally sexy naked chick that wraps her arms around him, and then she turns into a frightening, melted hag, and it's frightening as hell. And you would think that would have started me or something at 7 years old, but no, I thought it was fucking amazing, and it totally turned me on to Stephen King. And I started reading a lot of his short stories. The Night Shift book in particular was a huge thing when I was a little kid. And so yeah, and my dad showed me a lot of old movies. My parents both took me to a lot of movies too, which was really cool, because my parents had this sort of attitude that violence was bad, but, being hippies, but that sex and cursing, who cares? There's nothing wrong with that. Those things are fine. So they would take this little kid at 5 to 8 years old to see all kinds of movies, and my dad would, if it was rated PG or R, he would often go and see it ahead of time to decide if it was safe for me to see it. And I think he went and saw Alien, and that scared the shit out of him so bad that, like, he was shaking when he came home, and I think that was a little too much, he had decided. But then, like, a few years later, he took me to see, like, Raiders of the Lost Ark. That was probably the first movie where I actually saw any, like, gore of any kind, where the guy's face melts at the end and all that, and the other guys have explodes. So that was pretty awesome. I remember just being so amazed by the whole idea of cinema at such a young age. I mean, my mom apparently took me to see the cartoon Charlotte's Web as the first movie I ever saw in a theater, and it was like in a second-run community center type thing where they would just show movies for kids. And apparently from like a couple of minutes into the movie started, after the lights went down, my mom says that my jaw was just like on the floor like a drooling idiot, and she knew from that moment on that I would be obsessed with movies, and I totally was. It's like something about the whole medium was able to transport me out of myself, out of my wheelchair, out of being in this little room into an entire other world. And I would still say that's how it is for me. Whenever I watch movies, I watch as many as I can all the time, and I've never stopped, and I doubt I ever will. I think that movies are not only fun and exciting and like totally amazing and can show you things that you would never see ever in reality, but also they are amazing teaching tools, and I would argue that they can show you like perspectives of other people from any other walk of life, whether it's gender, or race, or age, or nationality, whatever. You can see people's perspectives in a way that is, I mean, you can do that with books too, and like all kinds of different things, but there's something about movies in particular that always spoke to me, and I think made me a better person and a more empathetic person and a more tolerant person in a lot of ways as I was growing up, for sure. I don't know if people out there have had the same experience or not, but that's definitely the way it's been for me. And so, from a young age, I was really into movies. My dad was also really into music, in particular rock and roll. My dad had a pretty awesome, my dad and my mom, but I think especially my dad had a pretty large record collection. Lots of Beatles, lots of Bob Dylan. The band was one of my dad's very favorite bands. He used to blast music from Big Pink all the time, and that was definitely one of the first rock albums I had. That, Sgt. Pepper, Abbey Road, Blood on the Tracks by Bob Dylan. I remember those in particular. I would, Some Girls by the Rolling Stones. It's like coming back to me now. The albums I had, I would take them into my room and play them on my little Fisher Price record player. And it would sound like shit. At the time, I didn't know that, because I was only 6 years old. It sounded good enough to me. When you're listening to Sgt. Pepper or Abbey Road for the very first time, even if it's on a shitty Fisher Price album record player, it still sounds fucking incredible, and it still blows your mind. I mean, I can remember just the overwhelming sensation of, like, just fear, excitement, just sort of overloaded, like, sensory input that would come from the end of a day of life or the heavy metal outro. She's so heavy on Abbey Road, like when you're 5 years old and you never heard rock and roll, that kind of stuff hits you in such a intense way. It's hard to even articulate it, and I can remember it to this day. And then I can remember as I got older, hearing other things that would just hit me because I never heard anything like it before. The first time when I was in junior high, I had a short-lived friend that turned me on to stuff like Metallica and Iron Maiden, and I remember just thinking how noisy and almost hard to comprehend it sounded at the time when I had no context for it. And now, and then after that, the Pixies or Led Zeppelin or just anybody who was pushing the parameters of what rock and roll to be definitely hits you. And, now I listen to death metal and black metal and all kinds of extreme metal, and that stuff just sounds like classic rock by comparison. So it's funny the way that your ears change and your perception changes just based on what you're used to. But yeah, I knew that rock and roll would be a huge part of my life and music in general, but something about rock and roll in particular I learned at a very young age, and I've collected and studied the history of rock and roll and all of its subgenres pretty much my entire life. I have a pretty encyclopedic knowledge of music history and film history and comic book history. And those are the things that I plan to focus on the most in this podcast. And more than anything, I'm hoping to do some pretty cool interviews with people from all walks of life, from the film industry and bands, musicians, actors, directors, writers, comic book writers and artists, and also, just political people and philosophers, all kinds of people from all walks of life, really. But, there's also a lot of crazy stuff going on in the world right now. We're kind of at a very strange period where it's not the zombie apocalypse exactly, but it kind of feels close to that, and it's really odd. So as much as I kind of didn't want to focus on politics and the state of the world, per se, I'm probably going to be talking about it a little bit, but I'm not going to focus on COVID all that much because you can get that anywhere and everywhere, and you can't really avoid it. So I'm going to make a point not to get too into that end of things. I just hope I don't get it, because it sounds horrible, and I don't want to die in a shitty way, and it sounds really shitty, especially if you have a hard time breathing to begin with, like I do. So there you go. So, yeah, I'm going to focus just for a few minutes a little bit more on my disability and what it means and how it affected me growing up. And it's interesting because it did affect, to some extent, my interest in horror and science fiction, which is kind of, you wouldn't really expect that, but I think it's totally true. So, yeah, I've got this real form of muscular dystrophy that they don't really have a name for. They just call it congenital muscular dystrophy. It's a genetic thing that I inherited from my parents. Not that they had it, but they both had the recessive gene that matched up. So I don't know if you guys know how recessive and dominant genes work, but basically, it would have been a 1 in 4 chance of their kid having muscular dystrophy. So I was very lucky, you might say, 1 out of 4, and I got my shot. And if I have a kid, I think it's very unlikely that my kid would have muscular dystrophy because whoever I had a kid with would have to have the same recessive gene, which is extremely rare, and they can test for it anyway. But even if she had it, it would only be a 50%. I mean, that's a big chance. So hopefully whoever I end up with won't have that gene, but it's still a 50-50 chance that even then my kid would have it. I just think it's important to tell people about that because there seems to be a lot of misinformation and ignorance about disabilities and sexuality and the way things get passed on. And I think a lot of people just ignorantly assume that if you're handicapped, your kid's going to be handicapped. And that is definitely not the case in most situations. Okay, so growing up, my mom was my angel, champion, savior. I cannot say enough things about my mom is how much she saved my life, gave me every opportunity and pretty much all of the opportunities that I had to become the well-adjusted, that's arguable, educated and normalized, quote-unquote, individual that I am. My mom and dad both taught me from a very early age that I was the same as everyone else and I would be able to do anything anybody else could with the exception of physical sports type things, as long as I put my mind to it and I wanted to do it badly enough. And they instilled that idea in me really early on. But my mom was the one who fought at every step along the way to make sure that I was publicly educated, that I didn't go to a special ed class, that I went to a regular elementary and junior high and high school just like everybody else, and that I was in the same classes as everybody else. And I think that more than anything was what made me the person I am, because I met up with some disabled people in like some disabled social groups when I was a kid, and I went to a muscular dystrophy camp that was up here in the Santa Cruz Mountains. And a lot of those kids, unfortunately, were just sheltered and put into special ed classes, often with mentally handicapped kids that weren't even physically disabled half the time. So you've got, luckily a lot of that has changed, and it's not half as bad as it was in the late 70s, early 80s, at least I hope. I have no conclusive proof of that, but I would expect so. And, being around kids that weren't disabled, I never would have just been exposed to every TV show and movie that all the other kids were talking about, and to get to go to school and discuss, the books that we were reading and the movies that we were seeing, and, the shit that was on TV, even if it was something terrible like Battlestar Galactica, or Knight Rider, or A-Team, or Dukes of Hazzard. That was the shit that was considered good television when I was a kid. And, boy, that has fucking changed, has it not? We are now in the renaissance of television, and it's pretty amazing, I gotta say. But yeah, so I went to, like I said, adult school, elementary school, right down the street. And I just had attendants, caregivers, whatever you want to call them, that would take me to school and just hang out with me and help me write down anything that needed to be written down and get all my homework together and all that. And anytime I wanted to talk, they would raise their hand for me, and I did that all the way up through college. That worked just fine. And I really want to give a quick shout out to all of my earliest caregivers, Lori Shelley, Dennis Minton, Tom Ellison. You guys were pretty instrumental in letting me live a full life, and I just want to thank you guys from the bottom of my heart for helping me live a normal life and get out there, because goddamn, I would not be the same person if I hadn't. And then in the junior high and high school, Sylvia Sardi, Glenn Estap, Mark Aladari, you guys, man, without you, I would never have been able to be a normal teenager. And you guys supported me going through all the normal, like, experimentation that a teenager goes through. And I think, like, drugs and masturbation and life and dating, and I think you guys navigated that in a really awesome way. So thank you for that. But you know, no matter how integrated I was, and no matter how much I had somebody with me kind of advocating for me and trying to help me to do stuff, people are fucking dumb and very lame, especially when it comes to severely disabled people. And when you are driving around town in an electric wheelchair, if your body type is different, as mine was, kind of bent and skinny, and I had a ventilator from the time I was 11 years old on, people just stare a lot and come up to you and ask you really stupid questions. Probably the number one question you would get as a kid and as an adult, luckily not as much these days, but when I was growing up, people were especially bad. They would just come up to me and go, "What happened?" As if like I got hit by a car or something, eh? So I was very practiced at giving the speech of what my disability was and how it didn't affect my brain and how I could do pretty much anybody else did and blah, 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 blah. It was almost kind of like a monologue I would go into because I would have people come up to me and ask me stupid questions so much. And it got to the point where it started to drive me nuts so much that I was walking home from junior high, I believe, one day, and I walked past my elementary school. I always say walked, even though I've never walked in my entire life, but this is the way I think about it. I don't say drive. Sue me. Anyway, didn't buy my elementary school, and I noticed there's just a bunch of kids playing in the playground, and I was feeling especially bored and devious, and I went over to them, and they came over and were really interested in me and what my whole trip was, and I decided to tell them that I was E.T.'s cousin, and they all believed me. And it was hilarious, and I laughed my ass off for hours. It was great. It was kind of mean, but it was pretty funny too. But yeah, you know, even going out in the public, if you go to a restaurant or, you know, any sort of coffee shop, any place where you have to like buy something and you're dealing with the clerk, not every time there would be the like 5% cool person that wouldn't do this, but 95% of the time those people would just talk to the attendant that I was with as if I wasn't even there, like ask them do I want a table, or what can I help you with? And luckily a lot of the time the people I'm with would have the wherewithal to say something like, why don't you ask him? Which is, you would think would be obvious, but I think hopefully there's some disabled listeners out there that know what I'm talking about and probably go through the same thing a lot, and it definitely starts to drive you nuts after a while, and it definitely changes the way you perceive yourself. Over time, it just becomes really difficult not to kind of overanalyze yourself and the way that you look and the way that you present yourself to the world. But then on another level, you kind of get to the point where you're just like, okay, I'm going to look totally different from everybody else no matter what. So everything that, the clothes I wear and whatnot don't even matter that much in the long run. But they do to an extent too, and all that. But it's just kind of interesting. Besides that, I would, believe it or not my fair share bullying in junior high and high school. And it was kind of funny because in elementary school, I really didn't get much at all. The kids were really tolerant, and that's probably just because younger kids are inherently more tolerant and open-minded and open to new ideas, and the older you get, the more you get fixed in your belief systems and prejudices and all that. So when I got to junior high, and then even more so in high school, I started noticing that I would get verbal abuse, particularly from the jocks and the athletic types and the popular kids. And it's just funny because it was kind of like being disabled sort of put you in the same category of being a nerd and a geek. And on top of that, I was a nerd and a geek, so I had two strikes against me right there as it was. So it's just funny that just like, the stereotypical revenge of the nerds movies and all that, you've got the jocks versus the nerds, and that was my experience. Like the high school football guys would give me verbal abuse for looking weird and being handicapped and wearing glasses and being skinny and talking weird, and it was just really odd and surreal, actually. And yeah, it's funny because when I was at the end of, I hung out with the geeks and the nerds, and I'm sure that didn't really help either. But I will mention that our quarterback was really nice to me and really cool. And he was the son of Senator Bruce McPherson. His name was Hunter McPherson. And he was super nice, really cool guy. And unfortunately, a year or two after graduating high school, he was killed in a mugging in San Francisco, I believe. Really sad and just weird. And it's just funny, though, that, like, the quarterbacks don't have much to prove because they're the quarterbacks, and they tend to be smarter, and it's the linebackers and the tight ends that are big and pissed off. It's just funny. At least that's the way it was at Harbor High. And so a combination of all that and a constant confusion both within myself and from society at large about, like, what it means to be a disabled person socially, because even today, and I think most disabled people out there will agree with me, disabled people are by far the most underrepresented minorities out there in pop culture. And until people are represented in pop culture, society does not catch up. I mean, I think that's one of the main reasons that, like, LGBTQ people are so accepted now is because it's been a huge part of pop culture and television and film and music, and as it should be. And it's just sad that disabled people really haven't gotten there yet. And part of the problem is that they're historically have really been very few actual disabled actors in film and television. That's starting to change now. The son of Breaking Bad, he actually has cerebral palsy, and there's a new sitcom out right now with another guy who ICP, I believe. I forget the name of it, but that's really awesome because up until then, literally only able-bodied people portrayed disabled people. They portrayed, physically disabled people and mentally disabled people. And it's just interesting because it seemed like for a while there you couldn't even get the Academy Award without playing a mentally disabled person, which is kind of funny. But in my opinion, it's really not that far off when you have someone who isn't disabled put in a wheelchair and pretend to be handicapped. It's not that far from a white person in blackface. It's really not. And it's something that is slowly starting to change, and I hope it changes more. Anyway, you're gonna occasionally hear my throat clear and stuff like that. That's just part of being on a ventilator, so get used to it, America and the world. So where was I? Yeah, so that experience and being underrepresented, being stared at, being teased, even though I have a lot of really awesome friends that I could count on and would back me up and tell me that I was awesome, it still had a toll. And by the time I got to college, I was just like super introverted and shy, and when I should have been like experimenting with my sexuality and like dated and having one-night friends with girls left and right, I was just like super scared and withdrawn, and I wouldn't really do much more besides talk in class. Part of the problem was I lived off campus, so I never really got integrate in the dorm experience, which I think affected it too immediately. Also, I got really into smoking pot when I was in college, and smoking pot has, while in some ways been a really good thing for me, and it definitely made my enjoyment of music and movies bloom and made it a lot more exciting and better in a lot of ways, and made me think about things in a really cool and different way in a lot of different things. But it also made me really introverted, especially in my early 20s, and it wasn't until I kind of slowed down on weed and got out of college that I started getting more confident in my sexuality and started getting girlfriends, and my whole life kind of changed in that regard. And I've always kind of been an activist in different ways, partly in the screenplays I've written. One of them is about my first long-term experience, relationship with my girlfriend Veronica that lasted 6 years. She was also one of my caregivers. That's an entirely fascinating subject in and of itself, because a lot of disabled people end up dating their caregivers, even though it's sort of frowned upon by the medical industry and whatnot. But it makes a lot of sense. You have a very intimate relationship with someone, and it just kind of naturally happens, and it can be really good, it can be really awkward, it just depends on the situation. I forget the guy's name, but I saw a YouTube channel not too long ago about a guy that had some type of neuromuscular disability and was on a ventilator. He actually looked a lot like me physically, and the channel was all about just him and his girlfriend that was also his caregiver. I think she lived with him actually, and like took care of him most of the time. They just put up videos about like their life and how they met and their relationship, and it seemed pretty positive and cool, and it's pretty nice to see some evidence out there of it actually working and being cool, because it's been pretty good for me for the most part, but just like everybody else, the problems I've had haven't been about the fact that they're my caregivers. It's just been interpersonal problems and dynamics and the same kind of shit that everybody else goes through, and I just want to let people know out there that disabled people are going to be more and more in your face, I believe, over the next 10 to 20 years. And you're going to see us as active, real, sexual beings. And the reason I, keep kind of going back to the sexuality thing is there's just something about sexuality and disability that has always been a huge, confusion, point of ignorance, fear factor for a lot of people, and I don't know why that is. My guess is it has something to do with, I think a lot of people, when they see especially severely disabled individuals, male or female, or trans or whatever, they just think that it brings up a lot of fear about death and about inability to take care of oneself. And there's something about most people that are not disabled, I've noticed, their ego is very wrapped up in their physicality and their ability to run and jump and do physical things. I mean, some people more than others, obviously, but in general, I would say that that's a definite thing, and it makes sense, and it's understandable to a degree. But there's also something kind of negative and bad about the fact that if you see a severely disabled person, you just start thinking, oh God, I could get sick, I could die, and how horrible it must be to have to be in a wheelchair all the time, or have to have somebody help you go to the bathroom and wipe your ass and all that. There's something about that in particular. I don't know why it is, but in so many movies and TV shows, it's like a trope that when people get disabled, as soon as they think that they have to have somebody help them go to the bathroom, something about that idea just fucking strikes fear into the hearts of able-bodied people everywhere. And I find it kind of funny because I've been having people help me with that since I was an infant, and it's not a big deal at all, and I don't care, and it doesn't bug me, and it's just funny that people get so hung up on these little things, and when you're disabled, you realize very quickly that no matter what, you just have somebody else doing things that you can't do for you. They become your arms and legs, so to speak, and it's kind of a beautiful thing. It's almost like this symbiotic relationship between a disabled person and their caregiver, and I think that a lot of caregivers out there probably know exactly what I'm talking about and probably see it as a pretty awesome thing. I think if you've been a caregiver as your job, you totally know what that's like, and you kind of see the awesomeness of it and how you're empowering someone who wouldn't normally be able to do say a podcast or dermatology or whatever it is you want to do. And that's pretty awesome that that's something that happens a lot. And I think people need to open their minds a little more and ask questions more, but also, you know, disabled people out there, it's partly their responsibility as well. Like, there aren't a ton of disabled people in the media talking about themselves and talking about their experiences. And the fact that I'm the only guy on a ventilator doing a podcast is kind of crazy in and of itself. Because there's a lot of people on ventilators out there, and you know, some of them have a hard time talking, but I'm sure a lot of them have figured out how to do it as well as I do. And yeah, we just need to get out there and stand up for ourselves and, you know, say that we're like everybody else, and we have sex, and we do drugs, and we experiment, and we challenge ourselves, and we break rules, and we figure out who we are as we get older, just the same as everybody else out there. Alright, so when I was a kid, as I said earlier, I was super into movies at an early age. I was super into television, and one of the first things I started watching on TV every time I could find it was old horror movies, and monster movies in particular. Frankenstein, the Wolfman, Dracula, all the old Universal ones, the Hammer Dracula movies with Christopher Lee. Any of those, the haunted house movies I could find, like, you know, The Haunted and The House That Looked Born and all that kind of shit, I would try to find anytime I could. And I would go to my elementary school library and check out all the books they had on monsters. They actually had at least 2 or 3, which was kind of impressive. They would have, like, pictures from horror movies and essays about them, and I would devour that shit when I was, like, 5 to 8 years old in elementary school and watch the monster movies. And I don't know why I was so attracted to it at the time, but looking back, it's really easy to understand. I identified with the monsters. I identified with them because I was an outsider in society, and people stared at me. They didn't fucking lunch with Angela's mom with pitchforks and torches. Luckily, if I'd grown up in the Midwest or the South, who the fuck knows? That might have even happened. But I kid. I kid. I swear to God. But anyway, yeah, I totally identified, I would say, especially with Frankenstein, the monster that, you know, felt normal and wanted to connect with humans and wanted to be understood by everybody around them, but couldn't articulate himself very well and looked different. More than anything, it was the fact that he looked different that scared people off, and I could totally relate to that.
Before you came, I was all alone. It is bad to be alone.
Alone. Bad. Friend. Good. Friend. Good.
And I also just liked being scared, I think. And so, got into horror movies all throughout my childhood. Watched them whenever I could, although my parents put a kibosh on slasher movies and ultra-violent horror movies until I got to be like 12 or 13, which I actually think was smart and good, because I think a lot of kids, especially these days, get exposed to really, really graphic violence over and over and over again at a super young age, and I really don't think that that's a good thing, even though I will totally defend until the end, free speech and ultraviolet horror movies and even movies that, people have just called like torture porn, like Hostel and stuff like that. I think it all to be a good thing, and I think it all to be a good release, and I think like it's kind of similar to pornography in some ways. Like we all have the side of ourselves that we need to express, and whether it's sex or it's on a dark side. And I think that in general, things like that are actually healthy, and I think that they actually stop people from doing, stupid, violent things like shooting people and mass shootings and all that. And I think that in general, horror movies are actually helping us deal with our dark side in a very positive way. But that doesn't mean that like 5-year-olds should be watching, Dawn of the Dead or Hostel or whatever reanimator. But I mentioned reanimator because when I was 11 years old, that's actually when I got my ventilator intubated, and I've been breathing on a ventilator ever since. And going back just a little, as I mentioned, non-progressive muscular dystrophy, what that means is that I was weak muscular-wise when I was born. So I never really crawled, and I never walked, obviously. And 80%, 90% of the people that get muscular dystrophy, it's way different. You start out having the same strength that any other kid has, and then around 6 or 7 years old, you start getting weaker and weaker. And that's usually Duchenne's muscular dystrophy. And it tends to affect boys way more than girls. I don't know why that is, but it does. And so I never had the experience of walking and then losing it, which is why I think I've always been comfortable with being disabled and used to it throughout my life. I think it would be way worse to have your, ability to run and do sports and then lose it in a car accident or through a progressive form of muscular dystrophy. And I can only imagine how hard that must be. And that's something I luckily never had to experience. And, so I was, because I was so weak as a kid, I had a really hard time keeping weight on. And in fact, up until the time I got put on the ventilator at the age of 11, from like the age of 4 to 11, I weighed around, get this, 30 pounds. And I looked like like a starving kid in Africa, pretty much. And it was because I was using so much of my energy just to breathe, and I didn't even know it. And I would, because of that, consequently get pneumonia like once every year or so. So I was hospitalized a lot as a kid, which was horrible and really scary. And hospitals are terrible enough as an adult, but they're even worse when you're a kid. And I used to get stabbed with needles all the time to check my oxygen. They had to basically go into your arteries with a needle in order to check your oxygen levels, because they didn't have the technology to do it when I was a kid. So that was pretty torturous. And when I was in the hospital getting my ventilator, it ended up changing my life for the better in a way that I had no idea it would, because after I got intubated, after a few months, my weight doubled. I was suddenly 60, 70 pounds. And I never got pneumonia and was never hospitalized for any type of infection or sickness ever again. Like, literally. And the only time I've been hospitalized since has been for, like, elective surgeries, like getting my teeth pulled out, for example. Anyway, I was scared to death at 11 years old because I was thinking about going on the ventilator. And at the time, there wasn't much, history of people on ventilators functioning in society very well. And so I was really concerned that I wouldn't be able to talk very well. A lot of people on ventilators at the time could not. And I was petrified that it was basically going to ruin my life, but the doctors were telling me that I was basically going to die of pneumonia if I didn't do it. So, as I was in the hospital recuperating and all that, so I was staying at Children's Hospital at Stanford, which was a pretty awesome place to be overall. And one of the coolest things was they had a music therapy department, and they'd have someone come in and sing songs on acoustic guitar, and you could sing along, and I was totally into that, because I was totally into music, and that was great. They had like a room with video games you could go play in, like a playroom, which was awesome, and my favorite thing that they had was a television and VCR that you could reel into my bed next to me. And it just so happened that there was a really good video store at the Palo Alto Mall next to the hospital. So my mom or dad or whoever was there with me would go rent me movies from the video store, and I would watch them while I was in the hospital, getting used to my ventilator and learning how to talk again and all that, and it really saved my brain and kept me sane. And in particular, there was a chaplain of all people that worked there. I wish I could remember his name because he was one of the coolest guys I ever met in my life. He was a chaplain, and I think he was Catholic, like nominally or something, but he loved horror movies. And he loved really graphic, violent, gory horror movies. And at that point, my parents were like, okay, you're 11 years old, I guess you can start to handle the, like, really gnarly slasher, gore type movies. And, so I started watching Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween. I fell particularly in love with A Nightmare on Elm Street and Freddy Krueger, who I think anybody who has half a brain thinks is the best out of, the big three slasher characters. And that's because he operates in your dreams, and he has a very amusing personality, even though he's a fucking child molester / murderer. And something about his wisecracking mixed with killing people just really hit my funny bone and appealed to me because I was in a very scary place, and I think I just needed something to kind of jolt me out of my reality.
This is it, Jennifer. Your big breaking TV. Welcome to prime time, bitch.
And so the chaplain guy, his favorite horror movie was Reanimator. And so I watched Reanimator in the Children's Hospital at Stanford. And I don't I don't think there were many kids around. I hope I wasn't stalling any of them too terribly, but I think I was just watching it by myself. Maybe some of the other kids that wanted to watch it came over, but Reanimator is still to this day one of the most graphic, gore-heavy, amazing movies in horror cinema. The effects in and of themselves are amazing. Dr. Hubert West, played by Jeffrey Combs, one of the greatest characters in horror movie history. Barbara Crampton as the sexy girlfriend. I will never forget probably one of the first topless scenes I ever saw as a burgeoning kid hitting puberty. And of course, the famous decapitated head giving head scene that is notorious.
I've always loved you. Love me.
So that was pretty amazing that even happened. I feel like looking back on it, and I want to thank that guy for having the guts and the balls to bring a movie like that into my life in the hospital, and a chaplain, no less. So cool. So that was when I got, really obsessed with horror movies in general. Started going back to the 70s, intense, not necessarily gory, but movies that I hadn't seen, like Texas Chainsaw and The Exorcist and stuff like that. And I was just completely hooked and was ready to be a horror fan, and still am, and never stopped. And then I started reading Fanboy magazine. I got a subscription to it, which was sort of the pornographic magazine for horror fans, because it would just put all the glorious pictures from all the movies. So you basically be looking at pictures of dead women, almost naked, but not quite, dead men, hacked up, left and right, and it was really transgressive as a kid, and pretty fun, and it was sort of like having a dirty magazine under the bed, but in a totally different direction. Wow, that reminds me of sneaking into Days Market, the liquor store down the street from my house, which is still down the street from my house, and looking at Penthouse and Lee and other porno ads when I was 10 years old. And man, so funny. Now internet is just at any kid's fingertips, and not just naked girls, but hardcore porn. It just blows my mind. I didn't even see a porno movie until I was 9 years old, and that was at my friend's house, because his dad was at work, and his dad had a copy of Debbie Does Dallas Free or something like that, and we sat in his house and watched it, and it was pretty amazing and intense at 9 years old. But then it wasn't I was surrounded by porn or anything. I would see the occasional Playboy or something over the next few years. And then, when I got to junior high and high school, then I would start renting porno movies and stuff and trying to find it. But man, it was hard to do back then. You had to do it under the radar when parents weren't around, and you couldn't just do it on the phone, and I don't know, it's porno is so weird too, and it's always so intense and dominant and submissive most of the time, and it just must be so weird to have that be exposure to sex at such a young age. I can't even imagine. But yeah, that's the world we live in now. most of the exposure I got to sex as a kid was just R-rated movie sex scenes, you know? And, yeah, so horror movies and R-rated movies in general, I was into pretty much all types of genres because my parents would, like I mentioned earlier, take me to movies that they were rated R as long as they weren't violent. I remember they took me to see the 3-hour movie Reds, starring Warren Beatty, about communist Americans around the turn of the century when I was like 6. And I remember liking it, which is so weird. Like, what? I must have been kind of a smart kid, I think, because I was just fascinated by it. Every time there was something going on that wasn't in my life, I wanted to know about it. I wanted to experience it. And so I had seen a lot of different types of movies. And then in college, I studied film, obviously. That's when Kevin Smith, Richard Linklater, Tarantino all came out at the same time. David Lynch had been going strong already for 10 years, and I was a big fan of him by that point, and they really changed the way I looked at movies in general, because when I was growing up, I was mostly into either horror movies or Spielberg and Lucas type stuff. I mean, I would say that Stephen King and Steven Spielberg and George Lucas probably, like, informed my taste and view and interest in science fiction, horror, and fantasy more than anybody else. And I hope someday I get to talk to all three of them, because they are just the people that made me who I am. And so I did get to meet Stephen King, side note, when I was 11 years old. Excuse me, 13. It was a couple years after I'd been on a ventilator, and I got a Make-A-Wish to go to New York City and meet Stephen King. Got to hang out with him in his penthouse suite at the Sherry Neverland in Manhattan and stay in Manhattan a week. Got to go see cats, got to go to the Empire State Building, saw the Statue of Liberty. It was awesome, really cool. And he was so nice and so cool. And it would be a trip to talk to him again nowadays and talk about the last 35 years that have gone by. Anyway, yeah, so I watched, all the Star Wars movies, Superman movies, Raiders of the Lost Ark, all the Indiana Jones shit, all the movies that were produced by Spielberg and Lucas. After that, that really hit me hard, like Gremlins and Labyrinth and Willow and all that stuff. Back to the Future trilogy, Ghostbusters. Those were my bread and butter. I grew up really at one of the best times, I think, in film history. Particularly if we were talking about science fiction and fantasy and horror and all that kind of stuff. It was just like all the effects people were going off, doing things that had never been done before, and it was all completely handmade and constructed, totally before CGI, and people like Rick Baker, Glenn Cannon, Stan Winston were just changing the idea of what could be done in a movie, whether it was the monster in The Thing by John Carpenter or the werewolf transformation that Rick Baker did in An American Werewolf in London, or Glenn Cannon's work in The Howling and The Thing. I mean, it's just, that stuff was mind-blowing and still is to this day, and I would argue better than 90% of the CGI effects out there. And it really hit you in a really visceral way that movies with incredibly high budgets that can be. You know, don't get me wrong, I'm a huge fan of the Pirates movies, for example, and the Lord of the Rings movies, but there's just something about the non-CGI effect stuff that really hits you in a, like, wow, that's really there, and it's freaking me the fuck out kind of way. And I was lucky to grow up during that time. But yeah, after growing up on all that stuff, when I was in college, I was like amazed by the way that people like Tarantino and Kevin Smith and Richard Linklater could use something as simple as dialogue to convey reality in a way that I'd never seen done before. And it really taught me that anybody could make amazing movies if they really wanted to. And they wanted to focus on, like, just the way people talk and the way people live. And, you know, Reservoir Dogs, Pulp Fiction, Torrance, Mallrats, Slacker, Before Sunrise, Dazed and Confused. Those movies really changed my life. Kind of like the second way in my life, the way the, like, Spielberg movies of my youth did and the horror movies of my youth did. And it made me just want to, like, watch old movies and 50s and 60s movies and find out all the good directors from back then. And there's just, it never ends how many great movies there are out there. And you'll hear me talk about a whole lot of them in many episodes to come. So, yeah, that's been a big part of my life. Television, more so in the last 15 years, ever since the advent of Netflix and Amazon and all the streaming services and all of the amazingly good shows that have changed television with movie high budgets, you know, Game of Thrones, obviously, The Walking Dead, Breaking Bad. I would say those three are the best free television shows in history in some ways. In the way that they changed what television could be and made them more like movies, like long-form movies. And probably 99% of you have seen all three of those, but god damn it, if you haven't, don't start watching them right this minute. Also, Fargo, the TV show, is amazing. Watchmen last year was incredible and really prescient about the racial issues in America in a really incredible way. I mean, anything written by David Lindelof and Carlton Cuse is amazing. The guys that wrote Lost, which is one of my all-time favorite shows. And I would argue that Lost actually changed television more than any other show before the advent of streaming television, because it was one of the best written, best acted shows ever made up to that point, and it also treated the audience like smart people that were capable of deciding for themselves what everything meant and didn't spell everything out in a clear-cut, obvious way. And a lot of people got mad about that, but that was one of the things I loved about the show, and I'm one of the people that actually love the finale, and think it's one of the best finales in TV history, and I will defend it to my core. But anyway, yeah, anything written by those two guys. David Lindelof did Watchmen, obviously. He did this other show, The Leftovers, which is amazing, based on the book, and the show was co-written by Lindelof and the guy that wrote the book. Amazing drama about a bunch of, basically 95% of the world's. No, I got that wrong. It's more like a small percent. It's like 1% of the world's population just disappears one day. And no one knows if they all went to heaven or what happened to them. And everybody's arguing about what it means and what it meant. And it really becomes one of the best dramas I've ever seen. The acting in it by Terry Toon, I believe, and Justin Thoreau is amazing. And then you got the tunes to write in The Strain with Guillermo del Toro, obviously one of the greatest horror directors of the last 20 years. By far the best vampire TV show ever made, instead of having like a dumb soap opera about teenage vampires. It's about vampires that are actually monsters and fucking scary as shit, and it's amazing. And it also is actually really prescient because it is all about a virus taking over the country, and I've just rewatched it, and there's a lot of similarities to what's going on in America right now, and the way that the government, the military is kind of reacting to it all. Very interesting. But that's a good general overview of a lot of my history with film and television, and what it was like growing up disabled in America. And I'll be going a lot deeper into my interest and history of music and comic books in the coming podcast, as well as diving more into my favorite movies and TV shows of the last 5 years or so. I'm gonna end things here by talking a little bit about the world and how crazy and intense things are out there. We've got this pandemic, and the country is obviously dealing with it horribly from a infrastructure government angle anyway. And of course that's because of Donald Trump, the worst fucking president in American history, followed closely behind by George Bush Jr. But it's not just a Republican problem out there. The Democrats have a lot to answer for as well, and I hope that people stay safe and stay at home and wear masks, because it really is getting bad statistically, and I don't want to get it, so don't give it to me, people. And I want to just talk about how I believe more than anything in nonviolence and love. And I think that Dr. Martin Luther King had more good things to say than almost anyone in human history. And we really all do deserve to live in a world where everyone, no matter their race, age, gender, disability, whatever, are viewed as equals and given the same benefits and chances to live their lives in a free and positive way as much as they want. And Donald Trump and every other fascist in human history just wants to divide us as much as possible. And he wants to divide the right from the left, and he wants to blame everything on, Democrats and agitators and anarchists and whatever the current term is for the left that is anti-right. And the problem is, if the left gets just as divisive and throws out rhetoric that is just as divisive and angry, then they're not helping matters any better. And the Democrats are not really doing much politically when it comes to the way they could have actually impeached Donald Trump with the way he spends money and his corruption and his racism and all the real illegal things that he's done. And instead of focusing on that stuff, they've just kind of barely scratched the surface. And then there's the fact that most Democrats have voted for war and bailing out the rich and Wall Street and perpetuating the 2% owning everything and everybody else being poor as fuck. And I don't think the Democrats really want things to change that much anymore than the Republicans do. I don't know, it's a dog and pony show, and we obviously need to talk about human rights and nonviolence and get the education system back in America, the industry back in America. Both parties have been just as guilty of not voting to get those things back and perpetuating the war machine and the military-industrial complex. And if there's one good thing that Trump has tried to do, it's back out of Afghanistan. And he's actually talked about how the American military should not be a police force around the world. And but that's like the only positive thing that he's said or done. And he's pretty much been blocked both by the Republicans and the Democrats to do anything about that. I mean, he's also increased military spending bigger than it's ever been in American history. So I kind of wonder how that works in his head. Like, why he does one thing and then says the other. Like, I don't know. Does he even mean any of that about pulling out of Afghanistan, the longest running war in American history? It's about to hit 20 years this year. But yeah, if there's anybody out there listening who doubts that the Democrats can be just as guilty of warmongering and killing innocent people, I suggest they check out the documentary from 2013 called Dirty Wars. And it was written and stars a guy named Jeremy Stahill, who is a journalist and covered the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq. And the movie is based on his experiences in Afghanistan, talking to the civilians who were killed indiscriminately by JSOC and the drone strikes. And if you watch the documentary, you just find out that Obama basically gave more money and more freedom to the Black Ops branch of the military to kill civilians and also do lots of bombings and strikes and attacks in countries like Yemen that we weren't even supposed to be fighting in. And it's horrible. And I would never argue that Obama, even though he was way better than Trump, was like a perfect president. Because a lot of the things he ran on regarding social justice and peace and equality, he kind of just dropped the ball on after he got in the office and became yet another, Clinton middle of the road Democrat. And with that in mind, I would encourage everyone to definitely vote for Biden. this year. Get out there and do it, and mail in your ballots, do whatever you can. The bigger the, separation is, and the higher votes he has, the less likely Trump and the Republicans will be to try to contest it or not even leave office. I wish the nominee was Bernie Sanders, obviously. He would have been way better and someone I would like to vote for way more, but it doesn't matter at this point. Vote for Biden. And beyond that, I would encourage everybody in the San Francisco district that Nancy Pelosi is the representative of to vote against her this election. There's a guy named Shaheen Buttar, who is an actual leftist and human rights activist who wants to change things and is running on a total grassroots campaign. That I just heard an interview with Jeremy Stahl. His podcast, Intercepted, the same guy that did that movie Dirty Wars I just mentioned. And the guy is awesome, and I think he would be a much better person to represent the Democrats. And Nancy Pelosi was basically got into power by the Republican Party because she ran against an actual socialist gay man back in 1987 and just won barely, and she's been a corporate, well-funded Democrat ever since. She hasn't even had to do a debate since 87, even though someone ran against her in 2008, which she just totally trounced. But maybe this guy has a shot. I am shouting out to all the San Francisco listeners, so I will make a point to make a little blurb about that in the San Francisco chat groups and Facebook pages and whatnot. But let's just end this by saying it's all about love and peace. That was for me, and I encourage everybody out there to meditate, practice deep breathing, read about meditation, do whatever you can to calm yourself down, ideally without hard drugs if you can manage. I think, weed, marijuana is a good way to go. It doesn't get you addicted. It doesn't have any bad side effects. And I'm also a big proponent of LSD. I always have been. And I will get more into that in another podcast. All right, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. Please do me a favor and keep listening. And subscribe and rate my podcast and try to get word out about it to as many people as you possibly can. I really appreciate it, and I'll be talking to you soon. Have a great night, everybody. Take care.